Hi everyone, and welcome back to my KSP KOS mod tutorial series. In my previous video I talked briefly about variable scope, and I want to expand on that a little today. First, I was a bit vague about what sections of code access to a local variable would be restricted to. As a general rule, braces define blocks of code, and this means that a local variable created between a set of braces can only be accessed by other code that is also between those braces. You can see an example on the screen right now. The braces are used to define the start and end of code that's part of functions, loops, and so on, but you can pretty much use them wherever you want. The code doesn't really gain anything, execution still flows in and out as if the braces weren't there, but what it does give you is the ability to arbitrarily limit the scope of local variables. Usually you wouldn't have much reason to do this, but the option is there. It is worth noting that I'm only going to show blocks of code defined using the braces, but what I'm going to say applies to all blocks of code, including those defined as part of functions and loops, but just because it's independent of what type of block of code it is, I'm just showing the braces here. So normally, if you define two variables with the same name, you get an error message. However, one of the interesting things you can do is define variables with the same name but in different scopes, even if those scopes are nested inside each other or if the outermost variable is a global one. There's a few examples of this on the screen at the moment. Now each of these variables is completely independent, so changes to one won't affect any of the others. But what happens if you try to access the variable? In all cases, the variable that you access will be the one defined closest to the executing code, searching outwards. So let's take this nested example. As you can see, we have three nested blocks of code with a few variables defined using the name x. Now let's say code in the second nested block wants to write to x. The first place to look would be in that block, but there's no variable named x defined there, so next we move up one level where we find that there is a variable named x there, and the value is written to that one. If that variable wasn't defined, then the write would go to the global variable because the search would continue to the next level up, and it would find that one. Note that the variable in the more deeply nested block isn't considered at all. The search doesn't go downwards into nested blocks. Now it's worth noting that I describe this as a search, but only for the purpose of visualizing it. That search doesn't actually happen when your code's executing. KOS knows which variable each write should go to, so your code isn't slowed down at all by nesting like this. So the technical name for this is shadowing, where the variable that you will access is said to be shadowing other variables with the same name that are higher up. Now here's an example of shadowing in an actual script. You can see that we have a global variable named x, and then a block of code with a local variable also named x. We change the value of each within their own scopes, and we print the value of x within the inner block and then in the outer block. Those two print statements will execute one after the other, because if we have just the braces by themselves, they don't affect the program flow at all. As you can see, when the script runs, we have two different values printed due to the shadowing. First the value from the innermost block, and then the value that we assign to the global variable in the outermost block. So now you should be able to figure out what happens when you have multiple blocks at the same level. Of course, you access the variable scope to the block that you're executing in, and if you didn't define a variable in that block, the search continues outwards, ignoring the other block at the same level because it never travels deeper into nested blocks, only outwards. So hopefully this video has helped you understand variable scoping a bit better. As always, keep an eye out for more videos in this series. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.